This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm Rob Port. So we're going to talk with Senator Kevin Cramer here in just a moment. Some of the things we're going to be talking about is you may have money showing up in your bank account right now. It seems like this year there's money just randomly showing up in my bank account from the federal government all the time because I have kids and I take the tax credit, and now it's like sometimes I open up my bank account, it's like, where did this come from? So I got my child tax credit payment this week. I need to make a decision about whether or not I want to continue getting it. I'm going to have to do some calculus on my taxes because I don't want to owe money at the end of the year. But I think there's a lot of question. Like, is that a good policy now? Should that policy be permanent going forward? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, Republicans are changing the way they're talking about climate. It's very, very interesting. And obviously there's debate because of the energy industry and coal and oil and natural gas and all of those things. And the way Republicans are talking about it is changing. And Senator Cramer has always been a leader on energy, both in North Dakota and now nationally. So we're going to talk with him about that. And then there's a huge debate about spending in Washington, D.C. Big surprise. But it just seems like it's we're not paying attention to the nation's needs. We're paying attention to ideological wants. But we're going to get into that in just a moment as I bring on my guest, Senator Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's start off. Do you think that this? And I was reading. Oh gosh, who was it? Was the Secretary of the Treasury who was saying that we need to make these new child tax credits permanent? What do you feel? Because on one hand, I'm thinking it's not. I mean, we're just taking a tax credit that we already had in place, and we're kind of paying it out over the course of the year instead of you getting that tax credit when you do your taxes. I mean, that in and of itself, in the panoply of bad decisions that Washington makes, that seems, if we could even call it a bad decision, seems like a mild one. But I mean, I don't know. What are you thinking of this policy? The Democrats sure like it.
Well, so it is a little more than just sort of paying it over the year. It's an expanded credit as well. And in the first place, it's a COVID response sort of thing, stimulus thing. So basically, I have some affection for the child tax credit. When it was originally passed, I don't know how many years ago, as a policy, it was a much more modest policy than what we're talking about today. It recognized the importance of family and incentivizing families and people having children and whatnot. But because as you know, there can be a lot of disincentives to that as well. We have a funny tax code. Let's put it that way, Rob. My ultimate dream would be if we just super simplified the tax code so that you didn't incentivize anything, that just free markets and people's free decisions would determine what kind of a tax code we have.
I kind of wish the tax code was based on what we wanted to spend as opposed to what we could get away with taxing.
There you go. You're exactly right. And so every time you add another credit, another deduction, another standard of some sort, you just manipulate or really warp the market, and people have to get more attorneys and more accountants to figure out how they can get the maximum out of it. So that's another, discussion. With regard to the child tax credit issue, we have in my view, a major problem. I'm on the banking committee, as you know. I had the opportunity yesterday in the committee to cross-examine Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who handles monetary policy, as you know, and doesn't like to talk about fiscal policy. And he and I had quite a discussion about that. And I talked to him fairly regularly otherwise about a lot of these things. But he has been very cautious about saying that we are having an inflation problem, as you know. He acknowledges inflation. He says it's just a few factors that are causing the inflation. It's all driven by the return of market demand after the pandemic, and that it's transitory. All of these are true statements, things I believe as well, Rob. But I do think he understates the inflation problem we're having. And he's been wrong every time there's been a new report of inflation, whether it's the consumer price index or the production price index or just the cost of doing things. It's much higher than the Federal Reserve's target, and it's lasting longer than transitory. Now, how much longer remains to be seen, but I'm afraid we've raised the floor in our productivity to a point where even if it moderates, and it will eventually, everything's going to cost a whole lot more than it did not so long ago. Okay, what's my point in all of that? My point in all of that is a lot of this is being driven by the liquidity that we put into the economy. That is to say, cash, free cash.
Thousands of dollars just showing up in bank
Thousands and
accounts.
thousands just showing up. Exactly right. And paying people to not work, paying people, to have that have children because they have children. Just paying people, because we want to keep people employed through PPP program and forgiveness. And there's all these things. But on top of all of that, and we can talk about the numbers, but on top of all that, we've had a Federal Reserve that's also been very dovish. That's been buying a lot of assets, keeping interest rates, brought interest rates basically to zero, and doesn't intend to raise them anytime this year or next year, not until the year after. All of that means that in addition to spiking prices and spiking demand and a supply problem because the supply chain is just getting back to work, whether it's producing things, manufacturing things, shipping lanes and ports and transportation infrastructure, all of that is a problem for inflation. But on top of all that, you have all this cash out there, cheap to free cash. And now this is why Governor Burgum and several other governors, discontinued the unemployment insurance benefit that's not scheduled to run out for a month or so yet. They ended it early because we also have a workforce shortage. And now you've got all this happening, and yet you have Janet Yellen, you're exactly right, who said that we need to make this expansion of child tax credit permanent. Rob, I believe that we are at such a inflection point, a major inflection point with a serious economic philosophy division. And if you just, nobody wants to sit and watch C-SPAN 14 or whatever channel the banking committee is covered on, but you can see that divide very clearly represented in the United States Senate as we're discussing these issues with the Fed chairman and economists and a whole bunch of others. So no, I think as a general policy, what we ought to do is just have a really good flat tax code, one that perhaps is taxed on how much you want to spend as opposed to how much you earn, and you're going to have a much cleaner market, and then people can do what they want to do.
How hard is it going to be? Because what part of what worries me about this is obviously, the inflationary things I think are scary. We are in such uncharted territory. I don't even know that there's a playbook for how to look at a lot of this stuff. So that worries me. What also worries me though is the expectations we're going to create among the American people. I remember when in my, at least in my lifetime of observing and writing about politics, the first stimulus checks went out, if I remember right, under George W. Bush, right? And I think they were like $100 a person or something like that. We sent them out. And then it just seems like every time Congress or the federal government does an economic intervention, a stimulus thing or whatever, it gets bigger and bigger and more dramatic every single time. And I'm worried that we're creating some expectations with the American people. First of all, every time we hit a rough patch as a country, that the government's just going to start mailing everybody checks. And I also worry that if the checks are just going to start showing up monthly, right? Right now we're pulling from the child tax credit, but how long until we're just pulling from other sources and we're making those checks bigger? There's that old saw in politics about how the American Republican is only going to survive until people figure out they can vote themselves checks from the Treasury. We're doing that right now. I always kind of thought, well, that's whatever. That's kind of a political cliche. But we're doing it. We're doing it right now. And we live in such a populist age. I worry that Americans, and it really not even matter what their ideology is, they're going to look at that $500 showing up in their account every month and say, gosh, why wouldn't I be in favor of that?
So the ship sailed, to your point. And that the philosophy, the understanding that a democracy can only last 200 to 250 years for the reasons you've already stated, we are the evidence of it. There is no question that, and I believe, frankly, Rob, I believe part of what we're experiencing right now in this political moment, where Democrats, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Republicans don't share blame in some of this, but Democrats who have a much, much stronger empathy for a socialist type of economic system. I mean, they call themselves socialist Democrats now. And their behavior as it relates to Cuba is a good example of just how much sympathy they have for that form of government. That they have, when they have all the levers of power, they are doing as much as they can, as fast as they can, before they lose all three levers of power, particularly in policy side of the ledger, to create an expectation that from which we will never be able to turn back. My only hope is that that economics starts getting taught again, that history gets taught more appropriately, and that all of these immigrants that are flooding into our country are coming here because they want an opportunity, not because they want a free check, and that they maybe will restore, the greatest system in the world. And Rob, I mean, I know there's a little bit of a shift, but when you watch what's going on in Cuba, when you see the Cuban people on their own in an organic way, standing up and fighting back against communism, and in a way that, as Marco Rubio, whose parents, of course, were Cuban immigrants, says, it is an irreversible trend right now in Cuba. They will not be able to stop the freedom lovers from having their way. When you see that happening, these people want to be us. Democrats want to blame us. They want to blame the United States and our sanctions for creating this chaos in Cuba, rather than the vision of the United States.
One of the most remarkable images, I think, from probably the last 12 months has been, for me, watching freedom protesters, not just the ones currently in Cuba,
right,
what's going on, but the one in Hong Kong, for instance. How often you watch the news footage or you watch the photos and you see in the background or right in the foreground the flags that they're waving, because those are American flags. And it makes me want to go to some of these people who complain about what a terrible place America is. Oh, we're systemically racist to the capitalist system and class divide and all the stuff that they say. And I say, why don't we want to just be the country that these protesters think we are? Right? I mean, because they obviously have a point of view. They want to get here. They want, or if not come here, they want their places, the places that they love, the places where they were born and raised and have all the same ties to that we have to, North Dakota and America.
Yeah.
They want those places to be like America, right? So we're busy in America trying to un-America America. Meanwhile, the people who are yearning for freedom in places like China and Cuba want to become the America that other Americans want to get rid of. It's a remarkable situation.
It is. And so to Ronald Reagan's and Abraham Lincoln's and Scripture's city on a hill illustration, we've been that to a lot of these people in a lot of these places, and little do they know we're going the other direction while they're striving to be more like us. But it raises then the next question, and I know this is kind of amazing. We started talking about child tax credits, but it is all directly related. The next question I would have for you and for our listeners of the podcast is, what then is America's role if we could get our own act together in helping others who want to become more like us? And then you get into interventionist politics and globalism.
We're leaving the middle. We're leaving Afghanistan after how many decades? 2 decades there, more than 2 decades.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's a valid question and one, frankly, that we talked about a lot during the Trump era, and you and I disagree sharply about President Trump. But one of the things that he persuaded me about was that we needed to take a step back from interventionism. But I don't think we have to. I don't think it has to mean boots on the ground, though, right? I don't think it has to mean Team America World Police parachuting
Right.
in and fighting all the wars for everybody.
Yeah.
I think that we can lead by example, right? We can. What
I-
Reagan
it- yeah.
said. Reagan was a man of peace. I mean, the funny thing about Reagan, for all people are describing him as a warmonger and everything else, he wanted to create a missile defense system and then give it away to other countries for free so that we could neutralize the threat, right? I mean, this was a man of peace, and he talked about America being the shining beacon on the hill. And I think that's how we do it. Like let's be the country that the Cubans think we are. That's all we have to do.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have to intervene in a boots on the ground sense, like you said. I could tell lots of intervention types of stories from people I've talked to from third world countries who were grateful for our interventions. And
sure.
I was asked the other day by a reporter what I thought about the president ought to do about Haiti. Should he intervene? That was the exact question. Should he intervene? And I said, listen, I think what we ought to do is respond to what freedom-loving, legitimate leadership in Haiti asks of us from a humanitarian standpoint. That doesn't necessarily mean sending in the military, although the military does have some humanitarian roles as well. But soft power, I'm a big advocate, Rob, of soft power, as it's called. I do a lot of forums on this. I've hosted some in North Dakota, global forums on how to better use our soft power to empower people. But you see what's going on in Iran right now, Iranian people. You see what's going on in Taiwan. Hong Kong, the ship sort of sailed. There's no question, I don't think, that Taiwan is next for China. China has its sights on Taiwan, and we have to be able to answer this question, Rob. And that is, do we want to send our do we want to send our treasures of men and women in uniform to defend Taiwan? Should China attack Taiwan? Earlier this week, China said that they issued a threat to Japan that they will use nuclear weapons against Japan if Japan doesn't behave better. And when you go to places in the Indo-Pacific region, which I've done in my role as an Armed Services Committee member, these are real issues that these folks deal with every single day. Australia, another one in the neighborhood that's stood up strongly to China and paying a price. We have to really think about our role as the leaders of freedom in the world, and what's the right tact to take. That's why when people say, "Why are we sending money to Africa?" or "Why are we spending money here or there when we have our own problems in the United States?" I just like to remind people that when we leave a gap someplace, whether it's infrastructure building or feeding hungry people or whatever it might be, our adversaries fill that gap very quickly. And when our adversaries, mainly China, fills a gap in Southern Asia or the Horn of Africa or something, or even South America in our own the own side of our world, when they fill that gap, they don't demand anything of those people. They don't require working with a legitimate government. They don't have any problem working with corrupt governments in a big way. They don't require any governmental reforms. They just give them money, and then they use that money as predators. It's predatory lending in many cases.
Well, and let's bring, because as you said, we started this talking about child tax credit, and now somehow we're talking about foreign policy. Yeah. I don't know how we got there, but I think there's a thread. I think there's a thread that connects these things, because when we're talking about like economic policy in the United States, our goal is independent citizens, right? Like our goal is you can pay your own rent, right? You can buy your own camper, you can buy your own food, you don't need anybody's help. You're right? That's freedom, because you're an independent person. You can pay your own way, you can take care of yourself, you can take care of your family, your loved ones. That's the goal. That should be our goal internationally as well. The goal shouldn't be America's going to come in and fight your war for you. The goal should be, how can America inspire you to do this yourself? How can America support you in doing this yourself? But the people there have to want it, and they have to do it. And so it's we can't just, we're having the CDC's eviction moratorium is set to end at the end of the month, and people are going nuts about that. It's terrible that people are going to have to pay their rent again. But isn't that what we want? We want people to pay their rent, right? That's freedom, right? And we want the people of Taiwan to have their own form of government and to be we want them to be independent of authoritarian Chinese rule. I mean, these are the things we want. And it's to me, that's a conservative principle. It runs through domestic policy and it runs through foreign policy. It's all the same.
It is. So self-reliance is foundational to our form of democracy in the United States. We are a self-governed nation. It's what makes us different than all the other democracies that came before us. And self-governance requires reliance. It requires a moral code. And so as that deteriorates, and that's why that old, Sazu said, how long can a democracy last? Only until the people figure out that they can vote themselves more money, is really true. And that's why we have to fight against that. We have to stand up against that. We have to have an education system, Rob. And I believe this is where one of the major problems in our country comes. I mean, when you have lots of Marxist and socialist professors who now don't even have to pretend to be something other than a Marxist or a socialist. It's actually okay to be a Marxist or socialist in our university systems, and they're educating our educators, and on it goes. Self-reliance suddenly becomes an alternative, not an aspirational goal. In many ways, right now we're living in a time when an aspirational goal is to be a victim of something.
Yeah,
and that's where the Black Lives Matter, the Marxist movement.
I was gonna write a column about that one time. I could never quite articulate it the way I wanted to, but I was like I want to put like a moratorium on people starting an argument with as a woman or as a man or as a whatever. Like you're leading in this argument with your identity as if your identity mattered more than the facts or logic or whatever it is that you're going to drop on me. Like, your argument should speak for itself and your identity should be irrelevant to it. But anyway,
you're right.
I don't know how to articulate that into
it'll come to you.
It'll come. Oh, one day I'll have it.
Yeah.
It is amazing too, because what you just talked about, where in our schools and that, we have people teaching socialism as if this is an economic theory that works, right? Even as we're watching it collapse, like Cuba's a failed. Even Joe Biden admits Cuba's a failed state. It's a failed state because of socialism, right? They tried socialism, it fails. It fails every time. North Korea's a failed state. China, I don't know if you call them a failed state, but boy, it's not a place I'd want to live. So here's the thing that's frustrating about all of that is that simultaneously that stuff's getting taught in our schools, but yet we have all this concern about disinformation on social media, right? We're concerned we're gonna ban people because they wrote something about vaccines. Or we're gonna ban some because they wrote that gosh, maybe the coronavirus started because of something that happened at the coronavirus facility that was in Wuhan province that not so long ago would get you banned on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So we're all concerned about disinformation there. But for some reason we get to the college campus and some of these academics are allowed. I mean, the 1619 Project is treated like a serious academic work. And I mean, it won the Pulitzer Prize. She's going to, what's her name? I forget the name of the lady who organized that. But I mean, she's going to make six figures a year working in academia. We're not worried about that disinformation. That disinformation's okay. Come on.
No, it's driven by political ideology, and there's a lot of people in the right places, evidently, that have that political philosophy, including and particularly in the media as well as education. And so you've got a lot of influencers that share that ideology, and unfortunately, I think you and I have talked about this before. It's probably why it's not always easy to be a conservative blogger. I mean, conservatives basically want to be left alone. We're happy to have intellectual discussions, but when your governing philosophy is leave me alone, it's hard to be an activist. But when your governing philosophy is centralized control, it's very easy to be an activist because if that's your goal anyway. So I just think we've got to remain engaged. You're exactly right. Disinformation can't be a one-way street. Hey, listen. I'm not necessarily against disinformation as long as everybody has an equal access to providing it. Unfortunately,
the problem as somebody who ran and continues to run a political blog for nearly 2 decades with a wide open comment system, I could see this problem coming for Facebook. You don't want to appoint yourself the speech police because you don't win. You're never going to make everybody happy. It's better just to let the idiots, because there are idiots out there, it's better just to let them talk rather than try to ban them and then you turn them into martyrs and then you make it seem like, oh, they're telling some scary truth everybody has to be protected from. Just let them talk. right? The best disinfectant for idiocy is sunlight. Put them right out in front and center.
It's so funny because when I think about all of the contentious meetings I've been in, town halls, which we're going to get back to, by the way, and live town hall situations. And there are many of my colleagues. I have several colleagues who've never had a town hall. I have a lot of colleagues who have a very formalized, institutionalized sort of format for town halls, and that can be fine. It can be okay. But one of the things that I've always appreciated about a wide open format is that the participants police each other. And that's really, that's a way better way to do it because to your point, the best disinfectant, you're right on. Transparency is the best disinfectant pretty much every time. And then you don't need so darn many regulations.
By the way, those concerned about what we were just talking about with what's going on in education, Google the term "long march through the institutions" and read up on that because it's an interesting topic. Let's move on. Let's talk about the $3.5 trillion spending package that's in Washington D.C. with 3.5. I remember when that was like the entire federal budget within my lifetime.
Not very long ago.
It was. I remember like the budget deficit's $100 billion. It's terrible. Like, oh my God. Oh, but if only we had $100 billion deficits, we'd be doing really good. All right. So what's interesting is Democrats are larding this thing up with the Christmas tree list. The last thing I just saw, Senator Bernie Sanders saying that the PRO Act, which if you don't know about this, I think it's a union. It's basically an assault on right to work states like North Dakota.
Right.
It's the Protecting the Right to Organize. That's the acronym, PRO, Protecting the Right to Organize Act. And it does all sorts of things, but the big thing it does is it ends in places like North Dakota. If you're not aware of this, places like North Dakota, you don't have to be like if you work in a business that's organized and that has a union, you don't have to join the union if you don't want to. You don't have to pay the dues. Right. In some states, you do. Now the courts have eroded a lot of that. And that's not nearly, and a lot of states have just outright passed their own laws. This, I guess, would be the federal government attempting to. Now, I am dubious as to whether or not Congress actually has that power. That's a debate for another thing. But this is an example of what Democrats are doing. We have real needs in the country that do need to be addressed with congressional spending, infrastructure needs, what have you. And yet we can't seem to govern. Congress can't seem to govern because they keep trying to stick in these non-starters like the PRO Act, and then they're going to pass it with reconciliation and get around the filibuster, which is just, I think to your point where you said they have the power now, and they're in a rush. What was it Rahm Emanuel said back during the Obama administration, never let a good crisis go to waste? That seems to be exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah, so great point. Where to even begin? With regard to the $3.5 trillion, let's just even back it up a little bit. Remember the first $1.9 trillion that Joe Biden and the Democrats passed using budget reconciliation, which is it's a Senate rule that allows them to pass something with a simple majority rather than the 60 votes that are required in regular legislation. So that's $1.9 trillion all borrowed. 1.9 trillion, none of which is original, normal, regular order appropriation. So let's just call it $2 trillion. This 3.5 trillion would be on top of that. So that would be $5.5 trillion. That's not part of the normal budget process. It's not for farm programs. It's not for national defense. It's not Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, any of that. That's all separate. Now we also have this bipartisan infrastructure bill that has about another 500 or 600 billion, so over $500 billion. I don't have to tell you how that adds up. That gets to $6 trillion, and that's all brand new spending. But Rob, if we do nothing, if we come up on the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, and don't pass a single appropriations bill or a new budget, and we pass what's called a continuing resolution, which is continued spending at the current levels with all the current existing policies attached to it, we'll spend $6.84 trillion, $6.84 trillion, $3 trillion of which will not be paid for. So that's another $3 trillion on top of all the other debt. Okay, and that's how big this is. And we are at about $29 trillion debt right now, this would be adding all that. Now, getting back to the $3.5 trillion that you talked about, which they're going to pass with a simple majority in the Senate and a simple majority in the House. And it's not clear they have the votes to do it yet, but they are going to set it up next week. That $3.5 trillion they do want to pay for, to their credit, and they want to pay for it with the tax increases. The tax increases that are proposed in this $3.5 trillion package are 7 times greater than the Trump tax cuts of 2017 represent. 7 times greater tax increases than the tax cuts.
The funny thing, because earlier in the show we were talking about being concerned about inflation. I actually saw Senator Bernie Sanders saying that inflation from all of this spending in the spending package wasn't a concern because it was going to be paid for by substantial tax increases, right? So don't worry about the inflation, folks. We're just gonna. It's not that we're just gonna take the money from you. That's
a statement like that.
And I say that I agree with you. To their credit, at least they're being honest about tax increases to spend for it. Like, that's exactly the debate we should be having. If we want to increase the spending, we got to increase taxes to pay for it. That's reality. That's just math.
That's just math. And so if you want to see sort of a fun 5 minutes of C-SPAN, I asked Chairman Jay Powell, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, a question about this yesterday in the Banking Committee hearing. Because Bernie Sanders saying, don't worry, folks, the deficit's not a problem. Don't worry about the big debt and inflation. Certainly don't worry about inflation because we're going to raise taxes. That's like saying, don't worry about the tumor, that large tumor in your body, because you're going to have a heart attack too. I mean, inflation's a worse tax than the tax increases they're talking about.
Yeah.
So you're adding a tax on top of taxes.
At least taxes can be cut. Right? When's the last time consumer index prices went down? I mean, no,
exactly. So thank you for that point, because the issue of how transitory, which is Jay Powell's word for temporary, this inflation that we're experiencing is, and I happen to believe he's missed it short every time. I've said it to him before he does it. I've said it to him after he does it. I basically implied it yesterday with him. Regardless of how short-term inflation is, it becomes the new floor, right? The consumer price index, the price of homes is not going to come down. If they went up $50,000, every home across Bismarck went up $50,000 in value in the last two or 3 months, they're not coming down 50,000. Now, some commodities will do that. But basic consumer price index does not do that, nor does maybe the production price index could, depending on, again, how many
a lot of products don't turn over. I mean, it's one thing for gasoline prices to go up.
Right.
Everybody's filling up a tank of gas like once a week at least. Right. How often do you buy a new home? Right. 2-3 times
Precisely.
a lifetime. So those prices do not move as quickly as say gasoline or something like food.
Right, and then they never come down. I shouldn't say never. If house prices come down, it's because you popped a bubble. Right. It's because there was a major depression type of
something not
situation.
So good is happening.
Right, that's right. So yeah, we are at a very difficult point. But I happen to think, Rob, this $3.5 trillion package. Remember, every single Democrat in the Senate has to vote for it to pass. If one doesn't, it can't pass. That means that certain members like Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, Chris Coons and other maybe more moderate Democrats will have a lot to say about it because they're going to want to do this. But I actually think in the House of Representatives, where Pelosi now has, I think it's a 4 or 5 member margin, I think it's even tougher over there. I think moderates in the House of Representatives see the end of their congressional career this cycle. And it's almost certain to happen if they oversee the largest inflation and the biggest crash of an economy in modern times, if not ever. And that's what they're facing. I think there are others like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders and Biden Harris who actually know this as well, and they're going to spend the next 16 to 18 months doing every progressive thing they can do to institutionalize socialism, basically. And so that's the fight that they're having right now. I have some faith.
That worked with Obamacare, right?
It did work with Obamacare, but it didn't work electorally for them. But you're right.
But I mean, long term, as a matter of policy, Obamacare
no
still
question.
With us.
Yep, you're right. You're right.
So I mean, if they have enough Democrats, and that's going to be the question. I think how many Democrats are willing to sacrifice to get on the bandwagon to to get something passed. I mean, how many are going to be willing to fall on their swords to get that done, and then be able to, I guess, not be in office anymore and be satisfied with, well, we implemented all these things. That's it was in 2010. It was all of them, right? I mean, they got it
That's
done.
right.
And then our good friend Earl Pomeroy in North Dakota lost his seat, and our two senators, Byron Dorgan and Kent Conrad, didn't run for re-election because the Democrats hurt themselves.
They spent all their political capital on this one big prize.
But maybe it was worth it to them. I mean, maybe they got the ball across the goal line, and maybe they're willing to do it again. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I do think that in this country, as divided as we are, we need to start governing in a way that recognizes that the people that we disagree with, the people who may have lost the last election, are still here. It's still our neighbors. It's still living next to us. And maybe we ought to govern in a way that recognizes that. Last topic I wanted to hit you on, because I think it's really interesting, is Republicans sure seem to be changing the way they're talking about climate. And Governor Burgum, not so long ago, raised a lot of eyebrows when he set a goal for North Dakota for carbon, going carbon, I want to say neutral, I think is the right term, by 2030, which is an aggressive goal. Congressman Kelly Armstrong, our good friend, has joined a new Republican climate caucus in the House of Representatives. We're talking, I mean, we have you and Senator Hoeven and Congressman Armstrong and Governor Burgum and everybody are promoting carbon capture in a big way.
Right.
This is a departure. Now, I've heard Congressman Armstrong talk about this and say, we kind of have to get with the times. I mean, that's the expectation in the marketplace, is that we reduce carbon. If that's going to be the expectation, that's the world we have to live in. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's the gist of his argument. I mean, what do you make? I mean, to me, I'm perceiving a big shift. Are you perceiving a shift, or why is it happening?
Yeah, it appears to be a big shift today, but it's been a slow shift for several years.
Yeah,
I'll tell you a little story just to illustrate it. You might recall after Donald Trump was elected, I went to Trump Tower in December of that year, prior to him being sworn in, to talk about potentially joining his cabinet. And I remember telling him, look, I'm happy where I am. I like Energy and Commerce Committee. I like helping you with energy and environmental policy in Congress. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'm happy where I am. And he asked me point blank, what do you think about climate change? What's your view of climate change? And I said, Mr. President, or Mr. Trump, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what yours is. The fact of the matter is the people that we work for believe it. Now, they believe different things about it. There's not like I believe it or I don't believe it. There's I believe it. It's not
like you're either Exxon or Greta Thunberg, right?
That's exactly right. There's a wide range of views on this, but it is widely believed that people want us to do something about it. So the question becomes for me, who's going to do something about it, and whose philosophy is going to govern that? That's why I like the Paris Accord. I didn't like the Paris Accord the way it was agreed to in the Obama administration, but I'd rather be at the head of the table than watching them do it to us, right? So, and there are times when you walk away from the table, and there are times when you lead, but I think the United States should have been leading more on the Paris Accord. All of that said, Dan Sullivan and I, Dan is a Alaska U.S. Senator. He and I have been leading an effort in the Senate, among Senate Republicans as well, on not just how to talk about climate, but what to do about it. And one of the things that I think Republicans and a lot more conservatives in the United States who want to play politics with climate rather than solve climate have missed is they've missed the political opportunity to be the solution. What I mean by that is that if we acquiesce our energy and environmental leadership to other countries, we're actually hurting the climate. And I think we get to stand up, we can, with a moral authority, stand up to Democrats and say, just this week, Mr. President, you have put a cap on, or you've actually put a moratorium on drilling for oil on U.S. federal lands and offshore, but you've opened up the opportunity for Vladimir Putin by helping him build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He's now lifted the oil sanctions on Iran. By closing down the XL pipeline, and now it's not going to be built, he's provided more opportunity for Venezuela. These are all bigger polluters than the United States of America. we haven't been able to articulate, and this is why I've met with so many of the major bank presidents in this country about their ESG statements. And I said just again yesterday in the banking committee, transferring your climate guilt to another dirty country does not solve global climate change. You want to solve it, invest in the United States.
You know what's kind of funny? You could draw a line from that to some of these big corporations that they're all woke here in the United States. They're all pro-worker and everything. And then they export all the dirty parts of the. I don't want to say dirty because manufacturing jobs are great jobs, but they export them. Or they export them out to countries. They put those jobs in countries where they don't have OSHA, they don't have worker protections. Workers don't have the same sort of rights that American workers do. So it's like, oh, look at how woke. So that's kind of what the environmentalists do. Look at how green we are here in the United States. Meanwhile, we're going to pump all our oil in Venezuela, where they have a corrupt country that don't have the environmental protections. They don't really care about the safety of their people. It's just it's a kleptocracy. They just care about the people in power getting rich. That's what we're gonna do. Because that's exactly to your point. When we block energy development here in the United States, it's just gonna get produced somewhere else, and they're gonna do it a hell of a lot worse.
Well, and on top of that, you missed the opportunity for U.S. innovation, North Dakota innovation, to get completed, to get commercialized, and get into the marketplace. So China, while we keep killing coal plants in the United States, they keep building them. Hundreds of them, and their coal plants do not have the same environmental standards as ours do. In the meantime, if we're keeping places like Great River Energy's Coal Creek Station alive and Falkirk mine alive, those innovators are finding solutions to these problems. And we come up with carbon capture, utilization, storage technologies in North Dakota and in the United States. That becomes an export for the United States. And it has the value of cleaning up an environment in other countries. So, yeah, to your point, I guess the point is how Republicans are talking about climate. I agree. Whether you believe it's completely nonsense or you think it's 100% man-made, it's our fault if we don't all stop, eating beef, the world's going to burn up. We have the opportunity to solve the problem rather than deny the problem. I think we ought to focus on solutions.
Well, and let's finish out. I think we lost your video feed, Senator. So I'm just for the
audience. Okay, I'm seeing that. I'm
just gonna keep my video feed on this. So if you're wondering why you're not seeing the Senator anymore, you're just hearing him. That's why.
Okay.
But we have about 10 minutes left. So let's talk about Coal Creek, because the big thing, the talking point we're hearing from the Sierra Club and everything, it's a big handout for coal. It's not going to work. It's pie in the sky. We're wasting all this government money. And to me, I don't think the government should be propping up any industry, whether it's coal, whether it's wind. I don't care. They should stand on their own 2 feet in the same way that I expect citizens to stand on their own 2 feet. I do think government has a role in research and development. And to me, that's what I look at with carbon capture, because we're at an inflection point where we want to reduce carbon, yet the carbon neutral sources of energy, people don't want to build nuclear, which is a whole other debate, which we could get into because I think that's unfortunate. But everybody wants to build wind and solar, but wind and solar can't carry baseload energy, not with the technology available to us now. So we need coal. So what if we could figure out a way to use coal? And I wrote a column about this, that I think what's going on at Coal Creek, I think it scares the hell out of the Sierra Club. I think it scares the hell out of a lot of these companies, because there is a real potential that we could figure out how to continue using coal well into the future and do it in a way that's in keeping with our modern understandings of climate science. I think that scares. They are so invested in fighting coal that they can't even bring themselves to support something that would allow us to use our centuries worth of coal supplies, and not to mention our gas supplies and all the other ways that we could use carbon capture. It scares the hell out of them, Kevin.
I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, Rob. I think it's, I've always thought of it as I articulated, if we kill the innovators, we're going to kill the innovation. But killing the innovation is exactly what some people's goal is. And if Coal Creek, by the way, and speaking of Coal Creek, I just have to say, first of all, kudos to Brent Sanford. Our lieutenant governor really did shepherd this. And I don't know how many people know that, probably not a lot. I like to mention it whenever I can, because he used his his knowledge of the industry, his sort of big CPA brain. He's got this incredible numbers brain, business brain, and his diplomatic skills to keep it all together. And he deserves a lot of credit, as do a lot of other people. John Hoeven, Kelly Armstrong, for sure. Obviously, Governor Burgum. So, but the marriage of these two companies, the acquisition of Coal Creek by Rainbow Energy, I love so much because Rainbow Energy is an innovator extraordinaire right here in North Dakota. North Dakota folks, people that grew up here, and they've been doing really big things around the country with almost nobody noticing. They have a trading floor that rivals Wall Street. I mean, it's unreal. And their knowledge of energy markets, electricity markets, how they work, how they work nationally, not just in a region. They're really the perfect owner for this. And you throw in some carbon capture technology, you throw in some other fuel sources, renewable fuels and whatnot. And you're right. They're going to solve a challenge. And the Sierra Club should say, way to go. You did good. And instead, they're probably scared that they're going to prove that coal isn't as bad as they said they've been telling us.
Well, that's the thing that I've been trying to get on people is so much. I mean, listen, valid concerns about the climate. Absolutely, I'm concerned about that too. I'm concerned about the environment. Humans impact there's billions of us on the planet. Of course, we impact the environment. What bothers me is how much of what are we going to do about it is being driven not by ration reason and facts, but ideology. People have staked out an ideological position against coal, so there is no set we can make coal completely 100% carbon free, and they're still going to be advocating for coal. And let's face it, some of it's pecuniary interest. Coal has competitors in the energy marketplace. There's no question about it. They want coal out of the way so that they can move on. That's part of it too. But I mean, to me, it's such a. What do you think? I mean, tell us real. I mean, it's not a certainty that Project Tundra is one example, or some of these things. Mm-hmm. There's no certainty that it's going to work out. Can you give us like a percentage? I mean, how likely do you think these things are to work?
Yeah, so I'm not a geologist, I'm not a scientist.
That's a fraught question. I know.
Yeah, it is. But I'm actually pretty bullish on it. And the reason I say that is the people that are making the investments are smart people, and nobody wants to make an investment to lose. And these are big investments. Now we haven't made the really big one yet that gets it over the hump, but good, smart people seem to be pretty confident about it. I think about what, for example, was done with things like nitrogen oxide and mercury and sulfur dioxide and particulate matter. These were really big things too. From scrubbers right in the in the process to how you treat the coal before it's burned, and it's amazing the efficiencies that have been found that have helped clean up coal. I mean, we've reduced emissions in this country more than any other country, and we also don't acknowledge that nearly often enough. So I don't see why they couldn't tackle this one as well. So they're gonna hit on one, and how soon that happens, I don't know, Rob, but I'm pretty confident.
Well, and you look at the people who are investing. I mean, Mitsubishi, they announced they got a blue hydrogen project in the state. They're interested in carbon capture. Bill Gates is investing in carbon capture. Bill Gates, who I think in a lot of ways probably wouldn't agree with you and I on the future of energy in America, but he seems to understand that carbon capture could very much be a part of it. And we're carbon-based life forms. If we're going to emit carbon, wouldn't that be a great thing if carbon-based life forms could control the carbon that they emit into the atmosphere through their various endeavors?
Yeah, sure.
That seems like a wonderful thing. Well, Kevin, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. You got any last thoughts?
No, other than along those same lines, my friend Sheldon Whitehouse, who anybody that watches Congress knows that Sheldon Whitehouse is probably the most, at least the loudest environmental activist in the United States Congress, or certainly in the United States Senate. He is a co-sponsor with me on 45Q legislation, which is a tax policy relating to carbon capture. Anybody that really knows the demand for energy in this country and knows the point of technologies, in the value system, knows that carbon capture almost certainly has to be part of the solution. So, and by the way, so has Joe Biden. He has included carbon capture as a major solution. Yeah,
to
his
his
credit.
credit, and in some ways, I mean, we don't have time for it to get into the oil and gas moratorium that our states filed a lawsuit over. That's very frustrating. But then on the other side, you look at the Dakota Access Pipeline situation. You look at Line 3. I think that the Biden administration has shown a what do I want to call it? I don't want to say a deference. I mean, they've held back. I think there's things they could have done probably to go on offensive with those projects. And to me, it indicates a pragmatism where they're understanding, hey, like it or not, we're using oil and we need pipelines to move it, and fighting them is kind of a silly thing.
Yep.
That seemed very pragmatic to me. Kevin, I
agree.
appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Rob.